if you look back in the past 50 years, there's sort of three categories of errors. And it's really derived from the three key drivers of economic growth, which are capital, which is essentially money, labor, and productivity. And I think this is a really good way or framework of setting up what the problems have been. Certainly with respect to capital, the issues have been excess spending that have led huge deficits, massive debts, in fact, arguably unsustainable debts. There's a lot of work going on around how the debts will actually reduce the possibilities of growth for the United States in the foreseeable future. And then obviously around labor, there are lots of concerns about the fact that there has been a lack of investment in education for a long time, which has eroded the productivity, which is the third element, longer-term prospects of productivity for the United States. So, for example, if you think about the last few years, there has been a lot of benefits in the productivity sector, but a lot of that has accrued to people in the technology area. And much less so in the broader manufacturing sector, and that is actually the sector that's been hurt quite significantly in this recent downturn. There are specific things I think that need to be done around reducing deficits and really refocusing the economy on things that are important, such as infrastructure and education, and of course the big energy question. However, the implicit contract around democracy means that you have regular elections, and therefore governments are much more focused on tactical solutions to the problems as opposed to focusing on what I would call structural solutions. So you hear much less about or discourse around issues that have longer term problems, as I said, such as education and energy, because those are in some sense intractable in the short term, but they're the very essence of the problems that are eroding the economics of the Western countries. It's important to understand that issues around development are much more complex than just, oh, it's money or, oh, it's democracy. And I think that China, for example, when compared to India, does have a disadvantage with its demographics. In fact, many people would argue that India's demographics are much better than China's, certainly in the foreseeable future. That being said, clearly, I would argue that we need to be much more innovative around democracy. So, for example, many South American countries have longer terms for their presidents in power, but it's still a democratic process. And I think perhaps Western countries need to look to that type of a model. Nobody's saying that they need to become state-led in a very aggressive way and ban democracy. But I think to say that a system which has so many regular cycles of democratic elections doesn't have issues or doesn't have scope for improvement, I think is also wrong. I think there will come a time, a trigger point, if you will, where things will get so bad that there will be a massive change in direction. And I think the United States is very good at that. And it makes me a bit more sanguine about the US as compared to sort of Europe, where I think a lot of the structures aren't so flexible in terms of moving around and changing. I think one of the big points that America in particular has is the technology space. Some of the big problems that, as I mentioned, the world will be facing, such as energy, resources, everything from arable land to water to energy and oil, fossil fuels, as well as minerals. I think those types of problems will have to be addressed by drawing on new technologies. And I think that those technologies are likely to come from places like the United States. However, at the same time, I would argue that because there's been so much investment in things like subprime or the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think that there's been not enough focus placed on these very, very urgent and looming problems around the resource sector. I think the Tea Party did quite a good job of moving things forward. I mean, I wouldn't say I understand what their whole manifesto was, but I mean, certainly they brought the discussion back to a point where it wasn't sort of a fait accompli. It wasn't so obvious that there was only one solution to what the problems that the United States was facing. I think in terms of what it might look like, I think the United States could see difficulties in reducing its unemployment rate. I think that's a very serious problem. I think it's something that they will have to address in the new Congress. I think also, aside from unemployment, I think the fact that there are these looming debts that the United States is going to find difficult to finance, I think that will also cause a trigger point. And of course, one of the big obvious ones is that what are the implications for trade and for globalization? And I think that although in the past people have been quite dismissive about the discussion or the possibility of the United States becoming more protectionist, I don't think that's off the table. In fact, I would argue it's come from being a fringe debate to being a much more closer to the center debate about whether the United States should be as open as it wants to be, or as it is, vis-a-vis places like China and other countries around the world.